should be May 25th, June 1st, June 8th, and June 15th, which I printed a lot of missionaries and things today, and it may have gotten mixed up with one of those. I may have to go help her. Did you find them? June 15th? Okay. 8th. All right, you might want to help her. I did a lot. There she comes. There they are. I should already give one to Stacy or Casey too. That's okay. Thank you, sir. Now, my wife had a suggestion on why they might not have printed. So after several weeks, I took my wife's advice and they all printed. So every once in a while, she gets a good idea. All right. Am I still live or did you turn me off? All right, Revelation 21, and the section goes from verse 1 through verse 8, but I did not print all of the notes. I like to keep my notes down to 2-3 pages, if possible, because that usually fills up most of our time. I'm going to read some of the verses. Now, we saw last week that heaven and hell were cast into the lake of fire, and whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. So the judgment seat of Christ is over. Those who were lost at the judgment seat, which is every one of them, were cast into the lake of fire. Satan and his beast and false prophet were cast into the lake of fire. Once Satan is removed, all of his demons are removed, and sin is removed. Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. Somehow, and I've read for years, there's some scriptures that maybe indicate that this earth will not be completely annihilated, just goes up into vapor, but rather this earth will go through something like our bodies will go through. You know, we're going to be changed in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, and that yes, God is going to make a new heaven, just as we are new creatures in Christ. We're new creations, but it'll be melting this earth down, so to speak, and then building it back, probably like it was in the Garden of Eden, maybe even better, because there won't be any possibility of sin. If it bears any resemblance, it'll be like our new body to us. You know, our new body, the rapture, will bear resemblance, you know, just like a grain of corn goes in the ground, and what comes up bears a resemblance to the grain you planted. So too our bodies will bear some kind of a resemblance. The only thing I ask is that I have hair, and you know, that my body, well, we'll get to that in a few minutes. There's a phrase there that I never forgot, because when I was, I don't know if I was still in college or shortly after college, I heard a preacher preach the whole sermon on no more sea. I'm not going to preach a whole sermon, but I can still remember many parts of that. You know, think about just no more sea. Before the sin, we did not have oceans. We only had seas. Back to Genesis. During the flood, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. The earth gave up the water that was in it, and it took 150 days for the water to max out in height, and now we have oceans. I know we have the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Indian Ocean. What are some of the other great oceans? If you don't remember, I don't either. Indian Ocean, yes, sir. Who? Arctic Ocean. Those oceans are the result of the water that fell during Noah's flood. It had to go somewhere. God carved out oceans, pushed up mountains, made room for all of that water, but the oceans will be done away, and there will be no more sea. Think about all the things that have happened in, with, or because of the sea, the oceans and the seas. Tsunamis out west, hurricanes on the east coast, tsunamis on the west coast. How much damage has been done by the seas as they stir up and crash? There'll be no more seas. Right now, the earth is made up of, I read 72%, and I can't remember what I was taught in high school, but it was somewhere right around 70% of the earth's surface is watered. How many of you, and I can't think of the name of it, Casey, you may know, before the flood, there were not continents like we know today. There was one huge, great big continent in which all of the continents of the world were gathered together. During the flood, the tectonics of the earth broke up, broke into different directions, and now we have different continents all over the world. But at one time, and I remember in high school, a teacher pointed this out, and I thought she was a heathen and an infidel who didn't believe in God or the Bible. But if you look at a global map, it almost looks like some of them fit together almost like a piece of puzzle. They were together before the flood. They were one great big, huge planet. But then they all broke up, continent. Then they all broke apart and drifted, and through the earth plates crashing and everything, they scattered around, and now we're surrounded by water. But there will be no more seas. With the additional dry land, there will be more than enough room to accommodate millions and billions of people. No more sea. Number 2, I, John, it wasn't a dream, it wasn't a fantasy, it wasn't a TV movie. I, John, saw. What I'm telling you was first-hand experience. I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. There are people, and I was actually taught this by, I can't remember where I heard it, but that this is the bride herself coming down. This is the New Jerusalem where the bride will live, where the bride will dwell. This is not the bride. This is the city that the bride will dwell in. And, but it's a holy city. It's holy because God dwells in it. It came down from heaven, or it came down from God out of heaven. Remember when Moses built the tabernacle? God said, be sure that you build the tabernacle like the pattern that you saw in heaven. So, we know that Moses saw something. This is a city, and I didn't get it in tonight's lesson. I'm not even sure where it was, but I'll get the exact measurements. But it was like, I'm pretty sure, but I think it was 1,500 miles long, if I'm correct, 1,500 miles wide, and 1,500 miles tall. Pretty good sized building. Jesus said, in my Father's house are many mansions. So inside of this huge city, 1,500 miles square, inside of that city, there will be, this is a city, there will be many mansions inside of that city. How tall was the Twin Towers? 100? Anybody know how tall the Twin Towers were? I don't either. They were tall. But imagine, and I'm from here to 1,500 miles, how far would that be from Cincinnati? For a piece. For a piece. This is a city in my Father's house. This is the holy city, New Jerusalem. And inside of my Father's house are many mansions. And as John looked at this holy city, the only thing he could compare it to was a bride adorned for her husband. That was the most beautiful thing that John could think of. And so he said, this city, he'll describe it more, but it's as beautiful as a bride adorned for her husband. Now, I still remember the day we got married. No, it wasn't the worst day of my life. Do what? I said the worst day of my life. But the only person that I was focused on that day, and the only person the whole audience was focused on that day, was the bride. They didn't, as far as me, I was there, but, nobody said, oh, look how he looks, and it wasn't a tuxedo, it was was it a tuxedo? I wore a tuxedo? Wow. Can't believe I did that. But anyway, nobody said, oh, how nice you look in that tuxedo. Nobody said to the preacher, oh, you look so wonderful today. Everybody was centered on the bride. And in that day, she was the most beautiful thing that could ever walk through that door. That's how John saw this city, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. So this is not only a city, but it's the tabernacle of God. And it's with men. It's among men. He will dwell with them. They shall be his people. God himself shall be with them and be their God. God will physically dwell among the saved. In the Garden of Eden, what did God do? How did God deal with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden? Before sin. Yeah, before sin. The Bible said he came in the cool of the night or evening. God would come down and visit with them. Here, he's going to dwell with them. There's a big difference between dwelling and visiting. Like I say, when God came in the cool of the evening, Adam had always come out and fellowshiped with God. Now Adam hid himself because of sin, but prior to that, they would visit with each other. They would, fellowship with each other. Now God is going to dwell with them. They will be his people. And then it says again, God himself shall be with them. In other words, there's going to be a perpetual, continuous fellowship with God. Now our fellowship is more hit and miss. Maybe, I'm sure everybody has it these days. Some days you just feel closer to God than other days. I had a real good friend of mine up in Ohio, pastored about 10 or 15 miles from us. Very good friend of mine back then. We would always talk on Monday morning. Every Monday morning, we would talk. Either I call him or he would call me every Monday morning. And he said, yesterday was horrible. I said, what was wrong? He said, spiritually, I was colder than last week's mashed potatoes. He said, I just did not feel close to God. I struggled to preach. I think we've all had similar times, maybe not quite that bad. But this will be permanent fellowship. Permanent in fellowship with God. Verse 4. Now this is after Satan is bound, sin is destroyed, the curse is gone, the earth and heavens have been gone away. We've got a new heaven and a new earth. And at this point, God shall wipe away all tears. There's a song, and I don't know the whole song. I only know a little bit of it. But I think it might be the chorus. No tears up there. No tears in heaven will be known. You know that song? Okay, he knows it. But why is it the end of the 1,000-year reign? Satan is bound. All of the demons are bound. They're cast into the lake of fire. Then God wipes away all tears. I think the timing is significant. When you think of heaven, we don't usually think of tears in heaven, but evidently there must be, because he said in verse 4, he shall wipe away all tears. Why are tears in heaven in the first place? Heaven's supposed to be perfect. Heaven is supposed to be, wonderful, beautiful, marvelous. Why are there tears in heaven to begin with? I thought of that, and I answered it in just a couple of notes down. every one of these things that are no tears, no sorrow, no pain, every one of them are negatives. Every one of them after the tears. So, if we look at that, let's go ahead and read it. No more death, neither sorrow, nor crying, no more pain, and all of these are negative. So if we stay with context, because I thought of that very same thing. These are tears of joy, but it would not fit the context, at least if I understand it. But it goes back, why are there tears? I got some ideas. I may have to sit down. My legs are giving out on me. Somewhere in here, we have had the judgment. They lost are at the great white throne. We are at the judgment seat of Christ. We covered on that a little bit last week. Is it possible that when we look back at our life at the judgment seat of Christ, and we see how much time we wasted, how many opportunities we blew, how many rewards that we lost because we built with wood, hay, and stubble, and we see our life, much of it, go up in flames, you think maybe we might have sorrow for a life that wasn't lived. Possibility. But from this point on, from this day forward, there will never be tears. There will be no death. By the way, how did Cain kill Abel? Anybody know how Cain killed Abel? Has nothing to do with Revelation. It has to do with death. You're smiling. How did David kill Goliath? Make that one easier. Stone. So maybe we should confiscate all stones. Anyway, back to the subject. No more death. I know that every one of us, I don't know, but I know, every one of us at some time or other have stood by the casket of a loved one. My case, my mom, my dad, my grandmother, both my grandmothers, my grandfathers, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends. And it hurts. It hurts. There is pain. There is sorrow. But once we will never, ever say goodbye to a loved one, a relative, or friend ever again. No more death. Death was cast into the lake of fire. If you recall last week, death and hell, verse 14 last week, death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. The sting of death is sin. There will be no more sin. There will be no more sting of death. We will never know death, nor the sorrows of death. Then there will be neither sorrow nor crying. Many times have we been disappointed in people. And we felt great sorrow. I was Had lunch with Brother Pittman the other day, and he and I were talking some of the preachers that we both know or knew. They're all dead now. But the preachers that we were very close to, thought a tremendous amount of. We loved those men. And we were discussing a couple of them in particular. I remember several, but one that he and I both knew very well. I came home one day and got the message that he had been, over the course of about a year and a half, and had an affair with another woman. I loved that guy. I felt like I'd been kicked in the stomach with a mule. I was depressed for days. There'll be no more sorrow. No more crying. You ever hurt so bad that you cried from pain? I hope not, but if you've ever been there, there'll be no more pain. Thorns and thistles were brought about because of the curse upon the earth. Untold millions of people suffer constantly from pain, anything from minor to extreme. I read a book a few years ago, it's been several years ago, a gentleman that was in the Pentagon, in the airplane, flew into the Pentagon. His office was right there, almost where the plane came in. He received third-degree burns over most of his body. And he wrote a book describing the excruciating pain. You know, they would come in and peel the skin off to get rid of the scabs. And, you know, he described in great detail. The purpose of the book was to show how ultimately it was God that brought him through. It was God that gave him strength to get through. I think of people that I mentioned just a while ago that are in constant pain every day, every day, every day. No more pain. Our bodies will be incapable of feeling pain. All of these things, the thorns, the thistles, everything will be destroyed when the new heaven and the new earth appear. Now, the question often comes up, and I've been asked this, can't remember if it was last week or week before, but I had preached and the question came up, will we who are in heaven be able to see the people in hell? And will we know that was my husband, that was my wife, that was my son, my daughter, my neighbor? And I think the closest verse that I could find is in Isaiah 66, and that should be in quotation marks, and they shall go forth and look upon the carcasses of the men that have transgressed against me. For their worm shall not die, neither shall their fire be quenched, and they shall be an abhorring unto all flesh. If we understand that verse, and I think we do, if you don't try to make something out of it that's not there, they shall go forth and look upon the carcasses of men that have transgressed against me. The worm dieth not, the fire's not quenched. He's describing the lake of fire here. Who is the they? And in looking at Isaiah, it appears that the they are those of us who are saved, are in heaven forever with the Lord. So if we will look upon the carcasses of those that were lost, how is it, why is it, that there will be no sorrow, no tears, no crying, will we know, when my mom is down there burning in hell, will we even know that she was my mother? And what will our attitude be at that point in time? If we see them, if we know them, which I don't think we will know them. I just don't think we will know them in that sense. It will not be with the fleshly emotions we have now. If we see them and know them, we will see them and know them as God does. Lost sinners who rejected Jesus Christ and are receiving the just rewards of their life. There certainly won't be any grief. There won't be any sorrow. So it can't be the, oh no, there's my family, there's my... If we see them, it will be as God sees them. We will have holiness, holiness, righteousness. And if we see them, it will be as God does. Sinners rebelled against God, died in their sin, and we will look upon them, if we see them and know them, as sinners who rejected Christ. There will not be any sorrow, grief, or crying because of what we see, the carcasses where the worm dieth not and their fire is not quenched. We will not have the emotions that we have today. I wish the person that asked it was here, but maybe they're streaming and will get it at least. There's not going to be anything in heaven that will cause us any grief whatsoever at all. Now, we'll look at a little bit more about the holy city, hopefully next week. All right. Sunday morning, 10 o'clock, Bill is supposed to be back. 11 o'clock, preaching. 6 o'clock Sunday night. Father, we